Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. How are the first 4 days? Hello, and welcome to Middleish, a podcast about moderation in all things. I am Michael Gray.
And I am Erin Green. Hello.
What's going on? Hello.
Oh,
Good
just watching.
Tuesday morning.
Yes, happy Tuesday. It is a happy Tuesday, isn't it?
We're going to make it a happy Tuesday.
Let's do it.
Let's do it. What are you watching? Snowfall?
I'm watching the snow melt. Finally, we had a kind of a deep freeze over New Year's here, and we got a ton of snow last week, and then it just like froze up. And I kind of like it because I like having snow on the ground instead of having it, melt right away and turn into just slushy brown business. So it's kind of nice, but I guess it's it's not a bad thing to have it start thawing out a little bit so the roads are better. And
you guys have had some real low temperatures.
Yeah. I think it was down to 3 degrees Fahrenheit overnight, which is on, I think, Saturday night. Yeah, it's cold. Yeah. We actually, so one side of our house is all like these big floor to ceiling windows with like a sliding glass door. And when we're sitting on the couch, it's right next to that. And it's cold. Like you have those windows and you're like, man, you can really feel it. And Matt turned to me a couple nights ago and he's like, do you think it would stay warmer if we close these drapes? Because we just never closed the drapes, since we've moved in here. And so we're like, yeah, let's go ahead and do it. We're all like, oh, that was a good move. Smart. Look at us. And Rally loves it because then he gets to run around in the curtains and play. And it's like his own little, fun house.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, we've been cold for here. We had 3 nights ago, I think our low was like 37. And then 2 nights ago, 31.
That is cold for down. I mean, if you're not,
it's not a competition.
Used to that
Erin.
kind of.
It's cold for here. Okay, so in the summer when you're hot, do you want me to laugh at you because like okay, no, it's cold for here. It's cold.
Yeah. We do get into the triple digits for extended periods of time, but we do not get the humidity that you guys have, and so it doesn't compare.
It's all relative.
Yeah.
The thing is, we get that humidity in the air here. So at 31. Plus, we had my parents were still here. Yeah, it was like 18 with the wind chill. Yeah, it was cold.
Oh my gosh,
it was real cold.
Yeah, the wind. I remember the first time I really experienced winter with the humidity, and I went and raced the Birkebeiner over in Wisconsin back in 2013, I guess it was, and I remember seeing on the thermometer of the minivan we rented that it was like 37 degrees out or something. And I was like, oh, that's not bad at all. Like perfect ski conditions, it's going to be great. And I step out of the van and I mean, it was instantaneous, bone chilling to the core kind of cold. Like the down jacket I had on and everything just was not enough. It felt so cold. And it was because the humidity was like in the 70s. And so you get that. Yeah, it wet, changes
cold
things.
Air, and it's.
I know.
My dad and I were just talking about that. Like it's only like 34, but it feels so cold because it's just like, it's like it gets into your bones or something. It's
I know.
Weird. Just like cuts through everything you're wearing.
Like coming from the inside out. Yes.
Yeah, it's like maybe you breathe in that cold air and it cools your blood down. That probably doesn't happen, but sounds cool.
So speaking of inside out, that actually segues into our topic today. But
it does.
Before I jump into that, we have a little announcement. If you didn't stick with us for the last, couple minutes of last week's episode, we talked about some changes that are coming. Mm-hmm. So if you did stick with us, this will just be kind of a recap of that. But Michael and I have some changes for Middleish that are coming, probably next month. You know us, we're not like little of a half-baked idea here, but we're going to be kind of switching up our content. It's going to look a little different. You will still get the podcast. We'll still have regular conversations and episodes. We're just going to kind of change how we're how we're doing things, because we've been doing the hour-ish long weekly podcast for, what is this, 85 episodes now?
Yeah, this is episode 85. So, I mean, coming up on 2 years.
Very consistent.
Over a year and a half. Yeah, every week.
And we appreciate everybody who's been listening and sharing. And we love hearing feedback. I mean, I hear from people all the time that they love what we're doing, and they share it with, if they work in healthcare or, mental health or anything, they share it with their clients. We have a lot of friends that listen and a lot of clients ourselves that listen. So thank you so much for making it what it is. And we hope to make it better. So
yeah. So
once we figure that out, we'll announce it a little more.
So we're at this place where we pretty much know the changes we're making. We're just not exactly sure how we're going to implement those and what kind of rhythm that'll be on. So we're circling the drain in a good way. We're refining it.
I don't know if circling the drain has ever been a good thing.
I started to say that and I was like, yeah, that's not going to make any sense, but whatever.
All right.
Yeah, but we should have specifics probably maybe next week, I would say.
Yeah.
Probably be, and we'll let you know what's coming and what to expect, but we're not going anywhere. So don't worry about that.
Yeah.
Yeah. We'll still be Middleishing.
Still be in your lives. So
whether you want
inside,
us or not.
Well, if they don't want us, Michael, they just don't have to listen. All right.
Nope. You don't get to stop. That's not how this works. It's a blood oath.
So Inside Out is such a fantastic movie. And I talked about this last year. Did you find what episode it was that we talked about Name That Emotion? The homework I had given myself was to watch Inside Out before we did that episode. And the reason being, because I think it's such a simplistic but accurate way of kind of naming our emotions and putting them in the context of maybe having these different living sort of beings in our minds that need attention and need to be honored and acknowledged and felt just like, anything else. And the movie shows how joy always tries to take over and keep things positive. And then, obviously through the movie, there's a lot of different expressions of these other emotions and how important it is for us to feel it all. So anyway, today we're going to talk a little more specifically on emotional eating and how these emotions play into eating and how eating plays into our emotions.
Absolutely. So episode 45 was Name That Emotion. 40 episodes ago, almost a whole year ago. Well, 9 months, I guess. And I really like that when you brought that up, when we first talked about this, that the whole kind of connection to Inside Out, because one, it's a great movie. It's a really good movie. If you like Pixar movies, is it a Pixar? It's Pixar, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
I think it's definitely worth watching if you haven't watched it. But yeah, I do think, I mean, this is kind of the point of the movie, but just to kind of reiterate it, like, yeah, there's a character, Joy, and the assumption is like she should be in charge, right? Like Joy should be the thing that's running the ship as often as possible. And if she's not, she should be doing it as quickly as possible. And then you have sadness and jealousy and anger, I think, are the other three.
Disgust, I think, is in there.
Oh, disgust.
Yeah.
Oh, that's right. That's 5. Okay. Disgust.
And
wait, is jealousy one?
Is fear in there? No, yeah. I think.
No, it's fear, disgust, and anger. That's what it is.
Yeah. And
I got one of them right. Yeah. So anytime that they kind of like are looming larger, right? Like, it's like, nope, shut it down and let's figure out how to get joy in there. And I think that is a good way to kind of maybe get this conversation started, is that I think a lot of times when our emotions become problematic is when we aren't honest with the emotions we're having, right? Like when we try to sweep it under the rug, or we try to quiet it, or we try to do something like emotional eating can be. Don't assume I'm saying something real hard and fast about emotional eating here, because we'll get into this a little bit later. But sometimes eating food can be used to quiet an emotion, right? Or to deal with it. And that's often, I think, not the best way to handle our emotions. if we're feeling something, that's honest. I have a friend of mine who told me before, he said, if you're feeling something, it's right. That doesn't mean that you can act however or whatever, but if you're feeling something, it's there for a reason. It's an honest thing. And so it's important to know why it's there, and just getting it to shut up and sit in the back seat and pretend to be happy is often not the best thing to do.
Right. And to just recognize that you don't necessarily have control over those emotions that you're feeling and the things that just pop up kind of viscerally. You do have control over the behaviors, how you respond to that feeling, the thoughts you have about the feeling, what you say about the feeling. And again, Michael and I aren't psychologists. I mean, Michael has his degree in social work, so I think you probably have a little more experience in this realm than I do.
From but 20 years ago.
Yeah, but at the same time, I think, because we're human too, we experience this ourselves. And in the area that we work in, fitness and health and exercise and nutrition and all of those things, I think it's fair to say we encounter emotional eating behaviors on the regular. Because here's the thing, you guys, it's the human condition to have an emotional response to food or to use food to answer an emotion. It doesn't mean you're broken. It doesn't mean you're doing something wrong. Food is such an emotionally charged experience. Think about a newborn baby. Okay. It has very limited emotions in terms of what babies can actually experience. They have a specific set of basic needs, right? They need to be fed. They need to have some attachment and some love and security and shelter, that kind of thing, like very basic needs. So one of those main needs is food. And when the first time a baby is quieted from a breast or a bottle by being fed, that is an emotional experience for that baby. So we all have been kind of brought into this world with this emotional tie to eating. And then think about, as you grow up, did you get a lollipop at the doctor's office? Did you get to go out for ice cream after you finished your little league game? Did you get rewarded with a pizza party if you did all your homework or something like that? So we do have these emotional experiences that are tied to food, whether it's reward or celebration or whatever, comfort, those kinds of things. So I present that just so we're all on the same page here, that emotional eating is not a bad thing. You're not wrong for doing it. And Michael and I are not going to launch into how you're going to stop emotionally eating, because that is just part of being human.
Right. Yes. And I think that's a really good place to start this, is just like, emotional eating is a normal thing. Normal as in, it's not a good or bad, it's a thing, right? Like there's lots of things. And like anything, if it's used too much or too little, that could be problematic. If it's our only coping skill for emotional stressors, then sure, maybe we want to have more. But and this is a big shift for me, like in probably just the last few years, because I spent probably most of I've been training for a little over 13 years, I know a good majority of those years I spent trying to help people stop emotional eating, right? And so this is a pretty big shift for me, just in my approach and my thought on emotional eating and just kind of what it can and can't be. But I think it's just really want to reiterate what Erin said. Like emotional eating, we need to unload those two words, because they are very loaded. We hear that and it's like, yes, it's a terrible thing that I've got to stop doing. And I disagree, at least in general terms. I think it's a term that we need to look at differently, and sort of like not look at so charged negatively, and look at it just as it's a thing, so let's kind of just get a sort of working definition for what we're referring to with emotional eating. So for me, and feel free to add anything, for me, when I think about emotional eating, to me, what that is when we have some sort of stressor, or not even stressor. I think typically it's stressor. Typically it's, things like, stress at work, or feeling lonely or bored or tired, sad, that kind of stuff. But it can also be celebration, that kind of thing. So let's say when we have a big emotion, and our unconscious or mostly unconscious response to either reinforce or quiet that emotion, deal with that emotion, is to eat food. And to me, that's kind of it. Mm-hmm. I mean, we could get more specific, but to me, that's a pretty simplified way of describing emotional eating. I think usually when we talk about it, we're talking about unwanted feelings of like loneliness or stress or sadness. Not always the case. But typically, if I'm talking with a client about it, it's usually around those things. If people are talking about emotional eating, just, wherever, that's typically what they're talking about. And because it's a response to an unwanted feeling, I think that, and then because we demonize eating after dinner, and this is typically when emotional eating happens, it just all gets like conflated as just this awful bad thing that we just need to stop. And maybe that's the case. I don't think that stopping it, even if it's an issue, I don't think stopping it is the answer, right? Like it's a byproduct of things. But we're going to dive into just kind of, how do we kind of look at emotional eating maybe differently? How do we kind of pick apart how it's working for us and that kind of stuff?
So I love your very straightforward definition, I think I totally agree with that. It's simply just acknowledging that you are using food to cope with whatever emotion. Mm-hmm. I think there's also another layer to this that is the societal messaging around how we should feel when we eat certain things. And a lot of times there's some messaging placed on guilt and shame and those sorts of things because of your eating specific foods. So have you ever seen something advertised as guilt-free? This is one of my, I talked about this, I think, when the buzzwords that need to die.
Yeah, I think so.
We get that messaging a lot where you should feel, that it implies that you should feel guilty for eating certain foods or eating in a certain way. And so I think that needs to be acknowledged in this conversation as well, that we have not only emotional eating is a response to how we're feeling, or maybe even how we want to feel in a certain situation. We want to use food as that coping mechanism or whatever. It's also a message that we get from advertising, from the food industry, from diet culture, from influencers, from your mom, from your dad, from, we've been brought up to sort of believe that certain foods should impart certain emotions, or certain eating behavior should impart certain emotions. So I think that's another important distinction for people to, what we're trying to explain here is building this awareness around how eating and how food is tied to our emotional state in so many different ways, and starting to make observations within yourself to understand, how does this play a role in my life? How do I perceive eating to be an emotional experience in all these different ways?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, here's my first hard right turn, but it works. It ties in. So Erin just made a really good point to just like thinking about like sustainability in a really big picture. And she talked about all this messaging that we receive very early on, right? Like from parents, from commercials. I was just reading a book to Sophie the other day that's like a very first reader, and it essentially, the message was like, this cat ate too much food, got fat, and so he was like bad now and needed to stop eating food. I'm like, oh, what? Are you kidding me?
Should we have a book burning party?
Right? Yeah. But so like when we as adults have, 20, 30, 40 years, whatever, of this messaging just like ingrained into us, and we just go like, okay, I'm just going to do keto now, right? Like I'm just going to change the what's that I'm doing. And we don't address the whys, and we don't really take time to pick apart, like, why do I hold these beliefs? why are these things so hard for me? Why do I struggle with the same thing over and over? Why do the same things continue to trip me up? If you don't ever do that, it's never going to work. Like, sure, changing, eating more vegetables and being more active and that kind of stuff, those are wonderful things. They are not the answer. Mm-hmm. There's reasons that those things are hard for you to do, reasons that you struggle with those things that you have to address. Mm-hmm. Because if taking care of yourself is a difficult thing, there's a reason for that. And just trying to white knuckle, just checking the boxes, it's not going to work.
Right.
That's my
thing.
And
I would say, no, I think that's a great point. And I would also say, and so I want to go through sort of the continuum of emotional eating that this book, Intuitive Eating by Evelyn Tribole and Elise Risch, that we went through, I don't know, lots of episodes ago. Maybe you can find that one too. Intuitive Eating. We went over it and we barely touched on the emotional eating piece. But just back to what you're saying, if somebody goes into this fad diet kind of phase, like they're addressing the what, I can only have these kinds of foods, and they're not addressing the why and the how of eating, I also think that's a form of distracting from their feelings and emotions that were at the core of some of the eating beliefs and practices before. So you're getting into, when I look at this continuum of emotional eating that I'll go through with in just a second, distraction is one of those things on the continuum. So whenever somebody is, and the other thing is, I think a lot of people that go into those dietary patterns of just changing the mechanical, what of the eating, like I can only eat these foods. They think that the end game of weight loss is going to then make them feel certain things. It's going to change your emotional state and how you think about yourself and how you interact with other people and bring you happiness and joy. And a lot of times people are sorely mistaken because they still have to deal with all of these other emotions. And if you'll find a way to keep coping with it with the way, which for a lot of people, it tends to be food, if you don't build some new tools. And so the idea would be, as we kind of talk through this conversation, you might be listening and be like, oh, that's a really good point. I can try some of these ideas to, cope with some of these emotional states and really acknowledge. I think the first thing is just acknowledging what am I feeling in this moment, and how am I trying to cope with this, and what's, a healthy way of coping with this. But then you might also recognize that, man, there's some trauma that keeps coming up from my past or in my life that I need some more help with this. And that's where a really good therapist or counselor or, mental health program can help with that aspect. So just don't be surprised if, as we go through this, you start kind of digging in a little deeper and thinking like, man, maybe I need to, a little more help with this.
Yeah. In fact, I hope you do.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want anyone to be bummed out or anything, but at the same time, like, I hope you do really examine things as you're listening to this of like, man, what are like some big beliefs that I have around myself or my body or food or eating or, exercise, whatever, that really continue to hold me in a fixed place. And I think, like you're talking about, Aaron, people have sometimes, I want to say all the time. I you know me, I really shy away from saying all the time, but I think pretty much all the time. If someone, let's say they have like, a really successful weight loss journey, successful in terms of they lost weight. Okay. And if none of the reasons that they've struggled to, take care of themselves in the past, or the limiting beliefs they have or anything of that are dealt with, I think initially it can feel really good because they accomplished their goal. There's a good chance they're getting attention for it. People are telling them like, wow, you look great. What are you doing?
Right.
You must
lots
be
of praise.
Yeah, there's lots of praise. And of course that feels really good. Absolutely. But that only lasts for so long. Right. And it kind of acts as a mask for all this underlying stuff that hasn't gone anywhere, that hasn't been dealt with, hasn't been addressed, still there. And so when that sort of like that crest, of the wave breaks and we're back out to, just same old, that stuff's still there. And even though you've lost weight and maybe you're happy with your body or whatever, nothing's really changed. Right. You still have all the same things that you're wrestling with. Like your relationship with food isn't any different. Your relationship with your body isn't any different, because your relationship with your body isn't dependent on the size of your body. Like,
yeah,
those two things aren't
the
same.
Although a lot of people think it is, but
well, yeah, because we're beat over the head with that, right? And so then you have that wave kind of breaks and all that stuff falls off, and then it's like, oh, I'm not as satisfied as I thought I was going to be doing this thing. And just like the process often is beforehand, when we're like, I'm only doing these things to lose weight, and if I'm not losing the weight, then why am I doing these things? Same thing afterwards. This isn't fulfilling and or this isn't fulfilling and rewarding, and it doesn't feel as good anymore. And I'm still in the same place I was before. And why am I doing all these things?
Yeah.
Right. It can kind of work on both sides of weight loss.
Right.
Yeah.
So when we look at the continuum of emotional eating, this is from Intuitive Eating, the 3rd edition. And I will include a link to this book in our show notes. But so the authors talk about the continuum of emotional eating, and it goes from one end, which starts with sensory gratification, and then goes to comfort, and then goes to distraction, and then goes to sedation, and then finally to punishment on the other end. So as you heard me read through those things, sensory gratification, I mean, everybody basically experiences that when you eat. That's a very common and normal everyday occurrence with food. It feels good to honor your hunger, to answer with good tasting food, even to go for something that a texture or a flavor that you're really craving, whether it's a crunch or a sweet thing or something. So sensory gratification, I think, is like the sustainable place to live when it comes to like some form of emotional eating. Okay. You have an emotional experience with that sensory experience with food. And that is one of the principles of intuitive eating, is to really dig into that satisfaction piece that you're getting from the food, and to give yourself full permission to experience the food 100% without the negative emotions that can come along with certain foods, the guilt, the shame, the regret, and that sort of thing. So for sensory gratification, I mean, that's where I would start with people. Like, let's really dig into how this satisfies you. What did you like about this food? Describe what it is like to eat that food. It might sound really bizarre. Like we talked about the raisin meditation when we did this before. It sounds really weird to like really go into the details of what it's like to eat a single raisin. But what that does is helps you tap into that sensory experience and what's going on when you eat that food. That's the first step, because then you're also opening the door to say, oh, it's okay to derive some pleasure from eating. And I will tell you, there are a lot of people I've worked with that feel guilty about getting pleasure from food. Like they shouldn't.
Yeah.
I'm like, it's pleasurable. Otherwise we'd starve to death. Like,
yeah. So it's like, and that's why I think there's just such like so when we interviewed Cody Schoen, she said something along the lines of like, we have this fetish with suffering or something something along those lines. And like, that's really is the case with being a healthier person. It's like we fetishize being miserable. Like, I've got to eat the boiled chicken and eat the foods that suck. And I've got to, work out all the time until I puke, and it's got to be miserable, and it's just like, it just so doesn't. Like,
I know it doesn't have, you don't have to be miserable. Like, you should enjoy food for sure.
And if you want it to last, it shouldn't be. Because I mean, really, do you expect to be miserable? You expect to either be miserable for the rest of your life or B or D, quoting Buzz from Home Alone. Do you think you're going to learn to love boiled chicken and kale?
I know. Like, you can convince yourself for only so long. So
nah.
eat for satisfaction and that sensory pleasure experience. Now, moving up the continuum, there's comfort. Okay, so comfort, I think a lot of people could easily distinguish between, oh, it's this food tastes good, I'm enjoying the experience of eating, to I am seeking for comfort here, or this food is comforting to me. Matt says it's a big bowl of happiness, when I make a certain dish. I asked a client one time who was struggling with some emotional eating coping, and it was problematic for this client. It wasn't like I pinned it down and said, we need to fix this. It was just coming up as a theme. And I said, what does it feel like when you eat this food, this kind of food that tended to be problematic? And he said, oh, it's like a warm, fuzzy, cozy blanket on a cold night. And I'm warm in my house and it's kind of dim light. Like, he had a very vivid description of what it was like to eat this food. And I was like, whoa, okay. So again, comforting yourself with food isn't a bad thing. We just need to be honest with what we're seeking from this experience and understand that, after he described that, I was like, well, what would it be like if you recreated that scene you just played to me without the food?
Grab a cozy blanket, and turn down the lights,
and just do it and see what that feels like. And he was like, I guess I could. So it's understanding that we have a lot of different ways of receiving comfort and recreating comfort that doesn't have to rely on specific foods. And it's also acknowledging that certain foods bring us comfort because of the memories we have attached to them, because your mom made you chicken soup when you were sick. And so a cup of chicken soup is very comforting and warmth inducing, so comfort is next on the spectrum. It's, again, nothing bad or nothing you need to avoid. It's just being aware of, oh, this is answering a need for me.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, I think sometimes we need to be comforted, right? Like sometimes, like, and that's not a bad thing. Like Erin's saying, like, being comforted by food is not, man, because I can just like sense that when people hear this, they're going to be like, oh, comfort from food, bad thing, right? Like it's like we have it in our heads that this is something to avoid and that we shouldn't derive comfort from food. Like, well, too bad, because it's going to happen.
Right.
Like you're doing it. We have these experiences. There are certain foods that chemically have different responses that make us feel happy, and I think everything's dependent on the person. Everything's individual, but like, here's two examples. Okay. So let's say I have a particular just crappy day. Okay. With bad day at work, getting an argument with a friend, car runs out of, whatever, just a bunch of crap that happens. And evening comes, my family's in bed, and I'm like, screw it. I'm just going to have a big bowl of cereal because it's just going to help me feel a little better. I have zero issue with that. It works, right? Like the reason people quote unquote struggle with emotional eating is because it works, right? Like it's a viable option to help us deal with stress. It can be. Now let's take another scenario. Let's say 3 months now at my job, it's just been stress, and nothing's changing. And my response every evening is to just go like, eat my feelings, right? Like over and over and
cereal.
Over. Yeah. Okay. Well, this could be problematic, not because of the food that we're eating, but because of an ongoing stressor that's not being addressed. Right. And so it's really important. This is, why it's so important to look at things individually. This is why it's so important to not just adopt some randomly generic plan and try to make it fit our lives. Is we have to look at what's driving this behavior, emotional eating or something else. For you specifically, what's the driver here? And because it's not it's often not what you're doing or what you're not doing that's the problem. It's why you're doing those things or why you're not doing those things. And so if we can get behind that, well, now we can really start to make some impactful changes. But it is really important as you're thinking about this, like, okay, so what do I use this for? How do I use this in this circumstance, in this specific time of eating? What purpose is this serving? It really requires, like we've talked about, a lot of mindfulness, a lot of paying attention to what your body's communicating to you and why you're doing what you're doing.
Yep. And that is a perfect segue into the next step on this continuum, which is distraction. So I think that's very common for people to distract. This is probably one of the most common, in fact, boredom eating is the most commonly reported form of emotional eating. Now, I think it should be said here that distraction can also be one of the, I would say, like, one of the most kind of benign, like, oh, I'm just going to go hit the pantry before I start this meeting because I don't really want to be on this meeting, or before I dive into this big project because I'm kind of procrastinating that it's going to take, a lot of time and attention, or I'm bored. I don't really have anything to do on this random rainy Sunday. And so I'm just going to kind of eat a little more, so there's a lot of kind of smaller sort of emotional experiences that go into this piece of distraction. There's also the tendency to distract from big emotions by eating as well. And so sure. I think this is a good one, it's right smack in the middle of the continuum. It tends to be the most commonly reported, whether it's out of boredom or other things. And this is the one where I think when we kind of think about the continuum of emotional eating, the scale starts to tip a little bit in the less healthy coping mechanism kind of range, where this is where you start trying to, or maybe not even trying to, this is where you start failing to acknowledge the emotion and failing to truly observe it and hit it head on and answer it in a healthy way. This is when we start to kind of just answer with food. I need to distract myself kind of thing. So that one is right smack in the middle of the continuum.
Yeah. Let me ask you this. So when you emotionally eat, is there a more common driver there that you've noticed?
For me?
Yeah, personally.
Yeah, I think I definitely am a procrastination eater. I mean, I'm a procrastinator anyway when it comes to certain things. I'm very disciplined in other areas of my life, but then certain things that I just know, like, oh, I don't want to do this. And so I will like have a little nibble or have a little something. I think that's the most common for me. What about you?
Probably boredom.
Yeah.
Like if I, like if in the evening, I tend to stay up a little bit later than the rest of the family and, I'll watch something or play video games or talk to a friend or something. But if I'm not into something, just kind of like surfing around, it's like, go see what's in the kitchen. It's like it's something to do.
Yep. And I love that. I'm thinking about, I think I mentioned this in a previous episode, but the scene from What Women Want, where Mel Gibson walks over to his fridge at one point in the movie and he opens the fridge and then he immediately closes it and says to himself, "You're not going to find her in there." So he's thinking about this woman, Helen Hunt, that is the whole idea. So he's trying to distract himself with going to the fridge. And that's, I think, a very common practice. So then the next one on the continuum, so we've got two more left. One is sedation is next. So we've gone from, the sensory satisfaction to comfort to distraction to sedation. So when I hear this word sedation, I'm obviously thinking like someone's drugged, right? Well, think about it. We use the term food coma, or like some people feel like they have the food hangover after, Thanksgiving or Christmas. So those are examples of how our society and humans on the whole have used food as a sort of sedative. And again, we're getting a little more serious into the realm of how using food to cope is an unhealthy practice and experience, because what you're doing is you're really trying to just get rid of whatever emotion you're feeling or ignore it altogether. I just need to sedate myself with something, with maybe not even acknowledging what you are feeling and naming it, but just, oh, it's icky and I just need to use food to try and overcome whatever this thing is that I'm feeling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Or at least, even if not overcome, just like not feel it, right? Like numb yourself out.
Yep.
And I think that's, I mean, you can see that with, alcohol. You can see that with drug use. You can see that with
you can see it with exercise too.
You can see it with exercise. You can see it with just like watching something. You're just completely like numb, marathoning something, so you just don't have to deal with whatever. And this is, again, an important distinction, is that this is not about food. This is about not dealing with a stressor, not dealing with something that your body is clearly telling you needs to be dealt with. Right? Like that's what these emotional responses are, is they're indicators, right? They're like little alerts on your dashboard, or indicators of your car, going like, hey, this needs attention. You're feeling this thing and you're feeling it for a reason. And I think in acute situations, sometimes it can be okay to just kind of quiet that and write it out, like a bad day. Sure. You wake up tomorrow, things are better. Yeah, that's different, But sometimes, a lot of times, we feel these things because there's something that needs to be tended to. And quieting it doesn't take care of the situation. We just don't feel it for a little bit, but it continues to be unattended and continues to grow and get some more severe and get deeper roots. And it's just, it's not a good situation when we do that.
And I would say that the practice of sedation with food, and then the final one will be punishment, which we'll talk about in just a second, tend to emerge more in patterns of, trauma, abuse, more serious kinds of situations that definitely warrant some therapy and mental health counseling and help to get through and work through those things. I want to just share a quick story that the authors share in the book for sedation. They say Connie is a young woman who had an abusive childhood. She learned to use food at a very early age as a numbing agent. She continues to sedate herself through the anxiety, fear, and sadness of her present life. Connie's weight can escalate dramatically when she is regularly going into her, quote, food comas. But even more frightening than her weight gain is the complete detachment from life that she experiences each time. She isolates from her friends, calls in sick to work, and feels completely hopeless about life itself. Connie is learning to utilize other coping tools so that she can improve the quality of her life. Wow. I mean, reading that example I find it to be quite heavy, because you can really just sort of start seeing how this unravels into this state of despair, and how it's far more than simple emotional eating going on here. There's this definite pattern of, again, that detachment from her normal life, and this cascade of behaviors and other feelings that are emerging because of this. So I wanted to share that example because I think a lot of our listeners can really relate to, the first three we talked about, the, sensory satisfaction, the comfort, and the distraction piece. But then some of these later ones, the sedation and punishment, are definitely more serious forms of emotional eating. And I think it's important to acknowledge those definitely warrant attention if you're finding yourself getting caught up in these kinds of patterns.
Absolutely. And again, this just echoes this whole concept of like how important it is to think in things in terms of you, right? Because look at here, we were talking about emotional eating and we have a very simple definition for it, but there's a bunch of different ways that people can relate to emotional eating. It can be a reward for finishing that project at work. It can be, I'm bored, so I'm, find something to eat. It can be, I've had some stress at work and this is just how I'm coping. It can be like dealing with and avoiding and punishing yourself for trauma that happened to you when you were 5. Like it can be a bunch of different things. And so again, it's just so freaking important that all of these things, we just look at, how does this apply to me? Not how do I fit in it? How do I relate to it? But what is it for me? What is it in my life? What's my relationship to it? How do I view it? Why? What's my perspective? Why do I hold these beliefs about these things? It's just so critical to get on that individual level if you're really going to make sustainable and long-term progress or changes. Because if you don't do that, it's just not going to happen, because it can be so widely, varied, dependent on who you are and your experience with things and how you grew up and that kind of stuff.
Yep. And the tools you have available. So, which we'll talk about here in just a second. I have a whole list of some different ways that you can cope without, other than using food. The final one on this continuum is punishment. And I think, a lot of people, when I hear punishing with food, I will be completely honest, it's not something I can relate to personally, because I never really went into that deep of a coping mechanism, but it's very common in disordered eating, in trauma. And I mean, even things that just seem so overwhelming. So I'm reminded of the scene in Fried Green Tomatoes with Kathy Bates. Have you seen that movie? I'm sure you have. No. Oh, it's so good. I mean, it was a good book too, but the movie's great. And Kathy Bates is this, housewife who befriends Jessica Tandy as the actress that portrays this elderly woman in a nursing home, and they just, develop this friendship, and Jessica Tandy tells the story of her life. Anyway, Kathy Bates plays this housewife who is overweight, and she makes it very clear that she would like to change her weight in her body, but she is so focused on the weight piece and how she looks and how she's aging and how she's disconnected from her husband and all of these things that she kind of puts it back into, I need to lose weight and I'm dieting, quote, but she doesn't really embrace like what she needs to change in her life. And at one scene in the movie, she's like crying to her new friend. And she says, I wish I just had the courage to get it all over with and just get really fat. And she's like opening, I think, a bag of chips as she's doing this. And she's just so like, she's crying, and you can just feel that she's in such despair that to me, that's a prime example of like, she is actively wanting to punish herself with food because she doesn't see that she can make her way through this. Like there's a better way. And anyway, that's just one of the scenes that pops into my mind when I think of like punishment with food. Again, this tends to be, I think, way more common with trauma, with disordered eating, right. Some more serious emotional states and experiences. And again, something to pay attention to. I mean, it could also be just, some people punish themselves through eating in a restrictive way. So I think that's another thing to consider here. Yeah. It's not just the binging piece. It could also be the restriction.
Yeah, we're really good at punishing ourselves in a variety of ways, aren't we? Yeah. As if we need to help life out with that. I think.
I know, like we need to be that critical voice and presence in our own lives, right?
Yeah. So I think, Erin, you've mentioned this a couple of times, but I think this is a real critical piece of when we're looking at how does a coping mechanism or coping skill or whatever work for us. You mentioned it's really important to know what's going on, right? Like if we're emotional eating, it can be helpful to know what's driving this, like we talked about, and then what do we do with that? And I think we may have talked about this before, maybe in intuitive eating, or maybe name that emotion, or randomly on one of my tangents on, who knows?
Could be any of them.
We could have been talking about the beach and I could have gone here. So. But I think what can be really helpful is like because we also have sort of like this pattern with emotional eating, right? We have like a cue and then we respond to that.
Right.
And when we initially have that, like that cue to like, hey, let me go open the fridge or open the pantry or whatever, is to just pause for a moment. And what I tell clients to do is just check in, like have a check-in with yourself. What am I feeling right now? Am I feeling hunger, or am I feeling some sort of stressor? And if you're feeling some sort of stressor, try to identify it. Is it boredom? Is it loneliness? Is it work? Is it a relationship? Is it fine? What is it? Mm-hmm. Is it sadness? Are you just tired? And just identify it. And then at that point, do what you want, right? Like, go eat the bag of chips. Like, for me, like, I don't care. We're not trying to fix anything. We're trying to understand. Right. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the important piece, is that as we're trying to build like awareness and mindfulness and that kind of stuff, we want to jump to the end and fix it all. But what we really need to do is just understand what's going on, learn how to pay attention to ourselves, because that's the problem, is even if we jump to the end and we try to fix the things and check the boxes and, close the kitchen after 7 and only eat, don't eat anything out of bag or a box, whatever, like, that's not the fix. Like, we don't understand what's going on. And so if we can take some time to begin to just like try to check in with ourselves and like, what am I really experiencing? What's the thing that made me subconsciously go to the kitchen and get some food?
Yeah.
What is that? Is it hunger? Cool. Eat, like, if you're hungry, you're hungry. Mm-hmm. Is it something else? Okay. Then identify it, figure out what it is, and then you can do whatever you want at that point. But I think if we can just begin to understand what's going on, begin to really like get in tune with our emotions and what our body's communicating with us, this is, even if we don't at all worry about it changing what we do, we just try to get in tune with what's going on. This is really, really important work when we're looking at being a healthy person, because now we're really learning how to listen to and understand what and how our body communicates to us.
Yep. I totally agree. And naming, that's why we called that episode Name That Emotion, because mm-hmm. naming it and identifying what you're feeling is a huge tool in the therapeutic world. In fact, I'm reading Brene Brown's latest book, Atlas of the Heart. And in it, she goes through 85 emotional states and experiences. 85.
That's a lot.
Most people can only name like, I think 3 emotional experiences. Happiness, sadness, and anger were like the 3 that they, so, I mean, just using that for perspective, 85 different emotional experiences. And it really goes through like distinguishing between some of these things. So I think that is a key, is just being a little more aware of, what am I feeling? What is at the core of this? And if you can't actually put a name on it that, the scientific literature that would agree upon, maybe just describe it. This is where journaling might be helpful, or talking with a friend. In fact, I have a whole list of things that people can do to meet your needs without food. So some of the basic needs that people have are getting rest, getting sensual pleasure, expressing feelings, being heard, understood, and accepted, being intellectually and creatively stimulated, receiving comfort and warmth. These are some of the very basic needs that people have. And oftentimes I think we can look at that list and be like, well, yeah, those are the main reasons why we emotionally eat, is, sensual pleasure, or I'm tired, or, I'm really frustrated because I'm not connecting with people, or I need to be comforted, those kinds of things. So I'm going to read a few options here from, if you're looking to be, nurtured. Rest and relax. Like, truly, I mean, take a freaking break, people, and do the thing that is relaxing for you. Okay. Learn to meditate. Take some time to breathe deeply. Take a bubble bath with some candlelight. Get a massage. Play with your pet. Ask friends for hugs. Gosh, doesn't it feel good? Like, I love actually seeing a friend and they say like, I need a hug. I could use a hug. I'm like, oh, come on, bring it in. Like, I'm so ready to give that. Spend time gardening. Buy a teddy bear and hug it. These are all things for nurturing. Dealing with your feelings would be like, write down in a journal, call a friend or several friends, those people that you can call and talk about these things, and they're not going to shy away or be like, why are you calling me about this? Let yourself cry. Oh, it is such a release. And we live in a society where people apologize for crying. And I'm freaking over that, to be honest. Like,
yeah,
we don't need to be apologizing for crying or feeling anything. This is part of the problem, I think, is that we try and stuff some of these emotions down without expressing them in healthy ways. Release your anger through pounding a pillow or a punching bag. And I would even say, like, go do a hard exercise session when you're angry. Like, get some of that out, because a lot of times it needs to emerge in a physical form. I would say that's a healthy way to do it. Sit with your feelings and discover how the intensity will diminish with time. That's another important piece. A lot of times we seek immediacy through food. It's readily available. We have tons of it around us. You can go through a drive-through or hit a, gas station at any given time. A lot of us keep alcohol and sweets in our houses so that we always have access to it. If you give yourself the time and space to actually realize, man, this really big feeling I have can actually soften, and I can sort of work through it with just time, just 10 minutes, 15 minutes of sitting with it. That's a really powerful practice too.
Yeah.
So those are some of the. Cleaning out your closet is another one. I love that one. Get some organization in your life.
Getting something done, feeling accomplished and productive can. Yeah, that's a big one for me. For me, that's a hard one to get into when I'm stressed or whatever, you know what I mean?
But then once
it can be hard to get started. It can be real therapeutic.
You're in it.
Yeah. And I think, going back to, you were talking about crying. I really think there are just some experiences or emotions that you can only process through like crying or laughing. There's something about like that jarring of the body and this sort of like heaving motion. Like there's just some things that you gotta do, that this deep like jarring that to get stuff out, because it can be, laughing and crying, they're very similar as far as like what happens in the body.
It's almost convulsive, sort of like rhythmic.
And it's like it just there may be science for this, I don't have any, but it's like it knocks stuff loose, stuff that has been like just kind of has taken root a little bit, and it just knocks that stuff loose, and it makes it a little bit easier to deal with, I think crying is so therapeutic. But, and then the other one you mentioned that I love on there is just petting a dog. Like I just did that last night. Like everybody was in bed. I was going to be up for a little while longer, and I was like, maybe I'll watch something. And I was just kind of petting my dog, surfing through Netflix. Like and I was like, you know what? I shut off the TV. I was like, the thing I'm going to do is pet my dog.
I know. And just be present with this other being. Oh, it's so great.
And I just spent like an hour just talking to him and playing with him and loving on him and giving kisses. And I was just like, man, this is so therapeutic.
Yeah. Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
I love that.
So, anything else?
I feel like we kind of went full circle on that and have had a pretty good discussion. If anybody has other ideas or questions on this, we would love to hear from you, and we'd be happy to answer anything. Meaning in the mundane, I almost want to say, like, one of mine is it's almost a daily thing where Rally, sometimes he wakes us up in the morning and I'm not super appreciative of that, the crying outside our door. But then other times I'll come downstairs. I love him, but it just, it's give and take.
Same with our cat. Yeah. When it meows at 3 a.m. because it wants inside, it's like, oh my God.
Yeah. Cat. But I love, like, this morning I came down and he's kind of sitting on his place on the arm of the couch, and he always greets me with a meow when I come down in the morning, and I can just like lay my ear on his side and love on him and cuddle and feel his soft fur on my face, and I hear the oh my gosh, it's just like there's something magical about that sound of a cat purring, and just the fuzziness and
soothing.
Just that warmth and comfort of just like hugging on my kitty cat. So that is, I had one of those mornings this morning. It was just, I don't know, quick little 30-second greeting, but it just started my day off right and made me so appreciative that I have this being in my life that is you know, he has needs and stuff too. That's why he cries at my door at 3 a.m. But he's a really great addition to our lives.
Yeah. Heck yeah. I can tell you guys love that cat.
I know it's probably sickening.
Well no, pets are the best. They're the best. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So for me, yeah, I guess I could say like just last night with my dog, because that was pretty great. But I'm going to say, so my parents are still here. They flew in last week. They leave day after tomorrow. And so this has been several nights, but just the other night in particular, you know, kids are asleep. Kathleen has a sinus infection, so she's been going to bed early. And we were just, you know, it's like 10 o'clock at night, just chilling out, playing cards, you know, just sitting around the table, playing cards with my parents, not doing anything, you know, super exciting or extraordinary, but just, you know, I see him a couple times a year, and just to have him sitting at my dinner table and playing cards with him and just hanging out, being together, was just really, really nice. Really nice.
Yep. Yeah. I love that. We're card players too in my family. Yeah. So that's there's something about playing cards that allows you to engage in conversation and, you know, be playful with each other. Like a lot of times my family will kind of talk smack. We play hearts a lot. And so we love like when somebody sloughs the queen in just the right spot, if you can place it in the person that's winning and you like nail them, and everybody, you know, there's a lot of that goes on that I think is just makes it really fun. So yeah,
for sure.
Great.
Yeah. All
Good.
right.
Well, I hope everybody in your household gets better soon.
Yeah, I think we're all on the mend. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's been an interesting time to all be sick when my parents came in. But thankfully, you know, we've negative tests. So we're not COVID-y. We're just sicky.
Yeah. Well, everybody listening, please stay healthy as well. And thank you for listening. And let us know if you have any topic suggestions as we iron out our new plans for 2022.
Yep. Thanks for listening, everybody.
Okay. Bye.